The Chris Johnston Show.
Let's go!
Your number one destination for a behind-the-scenes look at the game of hockey.
Is this thing on?
Here's NHL insider Chris Johnston and host Julian McKenzie.
CJ, we are days away from the trade freeze ahead of the Olympic break. This is actually our last show before said Olympic break starts. You excited for the trade freeze?
Yeah, I am, mostly because my life's about to get turned upside down.
Well, that's a separate thing.
No,
that's
in the best way possible. Well, I mean, you're asking broadly. So having a window of almost 3 weeks where there can't be deals kind of coincides nicely with some life events. So yeah, that's got me excited. And then obviously we'll just see what goes on. I mean, deadlines sometimes force action. This is certainly a soft deadline, 3 p.m. Eastern time on Wednesday, when the Olympic freeze kicks in. But you know, I do think we're going to see a couple deals here between the time of this recording and when that freeze takes effect.
Is James Duthie going to have to do an emergency TSN Trade Center show? Are you going to have to move some of those skits you've been filming for said show on Wednesday?
I hope not. I did save some of my best acting for those skits, so I'm sure there's at least a couple that could be churned out of there, although we were effectively doing one. But you know, this is part of it for James. I mean, one thing I know that we're happy about for TSN Trade Center this year, when it gets to the real deadline on March 6th, is we have a Leafs broadcast the night before. And the reason that's significant is because if things happen the night before, we'll be live on air with a pretty big audience. Obviously, Darren Dreger will be part of that panel. I imagine they'll have Pierre and I in studio as well, just in case we're needed for things going on. So it's almost like we have two trade centers this year, effectively, that we have the one the night before during the game we're broadcasting, and then obviously the whole next morning starting at 8 a.m. on air. So, you know, James actually, I talked to him about this very thing when we were together last week, and he said he's actually kind of zen about it because we're going to have so much wall-to-wall coverage to cover any trades that happen, maybe a little bit earlier than we'd like.
That's good. Ahead of Wednesday, I know we've talked a lot about the standings, particularly in the East, with how compressed they could look. Are we somehow still getting a better picture of who could be a buyer and who could be a seller ahead of Wednesday if we get trades? I'm thinking particularly of teams like the Leafs, where we saw some reports over the weekend that it looks like they could be trending towards selling. How do you paint the picture?
Well, I think the selling is actually the bigger question. Obviously, when it comes to some of the buyers, we might be talking about degrees of buying, like how aggressive they're going to be. But I think it's pretty clear which are on the top end of the pile teams that are going to want to, you know, augment their rosters and address needs and give themselves the best chance at it, you know, getting into the playoffs and going on a run. So I think the buyers are clear. The sellers are not nearly as clear. I mean, there's four no question sellers at the moment. We've already seen them start selling. They're the Rangers, they're the Canucks, they're the Flames. Those three teams have all made at least one significant trade this year, and in the case, a couple deals. And then you've got the St. Louis Blues in a clear selling pattern, even though they haven't officially started off the activity. And then you kind of jump to the next level, and you're getting to teams like Toronto, potentially Washington. I think both teams leaning into a potential sales posture, I would say, but probably haven't fully 100% made the move there, but well on their way to getting there. So yeah, I think, you know, that's where that discussion's coming out about the Leafs, and you know, you fall 10 points back this close to the deadline, because they only have a handful of games to play until that deadline itself passes. I think it's only natural. And you know, the one sort of team that everyone's invoking in the market here in Toronto is looking back to last year's Bruins deadline. You know, I've dug into that actually a lot over the last few days, Julian, just, you know, actually talking to some people that were involved there, and then, you know, looking at a little deeper. It was pretty impressive, the call they made, because when they actually went into sales mode last year, the Bruins were 2 points out of a playoff spot. Now, you know, Charlie McAvoy was injured, you know, after getting the infection during the Four Nations. Hampus Lindholm was out injured. Brad Marchand, their captain, was out injured at that time. They had talked to Marchand about potentially signing him to an extension and were unable to do so. So a lot of the wins around them were blowing them towards selling, but they were only 2 points out when they actually made those series of deals. They made 5 trades addressed some immediate needs and future needs. You know, they've got lots of picks still from those deals, including Toronto's first rounder for 2026, among others. So they did a really nice job. And Don Sweeney, I actually watched his 27-minute, address he made to reporters last March 7th on deadline day. And he was adamant at that time. He was saying, like, look, we're taking our medicine, no excuses. Like, if I'd have done my job better, we wouldn't be selling today. We'd be doing what we usually do, is buying. But he said, I still think we've got a really good team here, and we're going to quickly return to, putting the right players around the core guys that we kept, and we're going to pick right up where we left off. And lo and behold, I know they won't be happy with the result in Sunday night Stadium Series game with the overtime loss for the Bruins down in Tampa, but they're in a favorable position in terms of bouncing back, maybe being a light buyer. I don't think they're going to do anything silly at this deadline, and competing in the playoffs. So it is possible for teams that are looking to sell to look for some inspiration, I'd call it, from what Boston pulled off a year ago.
Not to mention, not to sound like a broken record, because I know I've said this so many times, you could be in so much worse of a position having a number one goaltender in Swayman, a number one defenseman in Charlie McAvoy, and your top forward being David Pastrnak.
For sure. And look, they fell right to the bottom of the standings. They drafted James Higgins in the first round last year, so they added a nice prospect for a longer term. One thing they were trying to do is identify players that they felt that were sort of prospects or young players in the league that they could help them right away. And they've got Huznadinov, who they got from Minnesota Wild in the Justin Brazeau deal. Fraser Minton, obviously fresh off of being January's Rookie of the Month and a player getting a lot of attention right now. But, they prioritized him in the Brandon Carlo deal that they made with the Leafs. And, they even got Will Zellers, who's a really well-rated prospect in their deal with Colorado, sending Charlie Coyle there. So they actually got sort of longer-term potential help or assets that they can trade down the road and all that future draft capital. Plus, they got players that are helping them now. And, they didn't take a big step back because they have those sort of flagpole core pieces still in place. I think it's a reasonable conversation to be having around the Leafs, making that distinction. Now, there's two important differences. One is I don't think the Leafs have as many obvious guys to trade that are going to carry the kind of value Boston's did. They do have a few, though. I'm not saying they have nothing, but they probably don't have the number in terms of, they don't have an equivalent to Brad Marchand to deal at this deadline. Assuming that they're doing this, keeping all their main, that Matthew Nyes and William Nylander and Austin Matthews, like that you're not putting into play the core pieces that you are building around. And the other thing is from year to year that the market isn't the same, right? I mean, last year it turned out the market for defensemen in particular was very pricey, and that helped drive up the value that Boston got back on Brandon Carlo from the Leafs. The other thing is the Bruins last year owned their own first round pick. The Leafs don't own theirs for 2026 and 2027. So the situations aren't exactly the same. But I do think, selling off some, if the Leafs can get some value on a Scott Laughton and Bobby McMahon, both pending UFAs, if they can turn, someone like Simon Benoit, even Brandon Carlo into assets, maybe Nicholas Waugh, who they've got from Vegas. I mean, if they can turn those players into assets, but also get some younger players, I think it makes a ton of sense because, it's hard to imagine, even I know they still have a couple games left here before the break, Julian. It's just hard to imagine to me that this group is going to climb back in, that they're going to win. They would have to reel off sort of like an 8 wins in 10 games thing just to even get sort of back in the conversation. And then they'd have to complete the job. It just, the season's running out on them and the math is dire in terms of the odds of them making the playoffs.
Yeah, it's not looking particularly good for that group. I wonder if you're Brad Treliving, not to put you back in his brain again, what are you targeting in terms of capital if you are put in that position to sell for some of those pieces you mentioned?
Well, to me, they have to fix their blue line. And so, I think if you're talking about young players that could potentially, be ready to be in the NHL next year, like if you can get defensive prospect or two, that makes a lot of sense. Obviously, every team needs centers. It's a fact of life in the NHL. The Leafs have John Tavares signed for a few more years. They've obviously got Austin Matthews, so they're pretty good at the top. And I think if you could get a center, unfortunately, like the one that they traded away in Fraser Minton, if you could find that kind of player, I think that would have value. And then it's really just about getting draft picks in the door, not because I think the Leafs necessarily have to draft all those players, but that's been one thing they've run up against in trying to make deals is the cupboard is pretty bare of the things you most want. And so I think picks, defensive prospects, and maybe a center prospect if you can find one that makes sense. And look, they're going to have to trust their pro scouts. They're going to have to really lean on even their amateur people, because when you're talking about prospects, you're talking about players that haven't fully developed into what they're going to be, and identifying the right pieces from teams that are making trades. One issue I think that could come up at this deadline is a lot of the best teams that will be buying have already sold their first round pick. There's not a lot of first round pick capital out there from the absolute best teams in the league. They've just already made those deals where those picks are spoken for. So, the Leafs and other teams, unless they're trading for 2027 first rounders, might not get as many first round picks as you've seen in the past. But that might open up a possibility to get better prospects, right? That there's different ways to approach these trades. You have to, again, identify ahead of time, I think, the right fits, because Boston, it should be noted, Julian, they made those deals in like 2 days. They made 5 trades in 2 or 3 days, right, leading up to the deadline. So they had to be ready ahead of time to know which players they wanted to prioritize if deals came along. And I would think the Leafs, that's part of what these next few weeks are about is, Brad Treliving getting a real sense of everyone's value on the market in terms of trade value. Because I think, there's a few players where it could go either way. Like the Leafs certainly have interest in keeping a Bobby McMann or a Scott Lawton if the contracts make sense. Like if the numbers make sense, but so they could pivot to signing one of those players or trading them depending on where the best value or expected value is to be found. And so that's the process that I think is ongoing. I think it's becoming clearer and clearer now, but I'll tell you, I've heard Leafs players' names in the trade mill for 8 weeks. Like I think the Leafs have been at times gauging the market on their guys already. It's just now getting much closer to when they would have to make a decision, and I think they're starting to lean in the direction of becoming a seller. But it wasn't only in the last few days that they started to poke around and see, hey, would you take a Simon Benoit? Like, what would you pay for him? I think those conversations have actually go back quite a ways. And what's happening now, though, is we're just getting closer to the point where, those kind of trades could materialize. And I think because there's not that many sellers, to loop back to my original point, Julian, it could be a good time for a team like the Leafs or even the Capitals if they get to the same spot to sell some players. Because, right now the market is not flooded with options. And the Leafs do at least have some potential options there that I think could start this little bit of a refresh, we'll call it.
A refresh? Okay.
Well, I don't know. Everyone gets obsessed with Retool because what I'm talking about is not a rebuild.
Refresh.
It's not a rebuild in the
Calgary. They've made jokes about re-biggle over how Don Maloney said it. All these re's. Anyway.
Well, look at
anything. Go ahead.
A team like the Leafs has been a buyer for 9 straight deadlines, right?
Yeah.
So prior to this one. So for them to even sell, again, if I end up being like third pairing defenseman or a third line player that was on an expiring deal, like that would be a first in a long, long time for the organization. But I don't think it should be branded it's certainly not a rebuild. As long as if you're keeping guys making the big money and you're not touching them, then it's not a rebuild until one of them is moved. And I don't even know if it's a full retool. That's why sometimes retool to me still signifies something large. But I don't know. We can workshop it. I can tell you don't like refresh, even though I think that is actually an accurate descriptor of what's going on.
I don't have a problem with it. I just find it funny that we are finding all these different ways to get away from rebuild. I just think it's funny. I do like refresh.
Well, rebuild has become a loaded word. Like some teams are scared to say it because they're worried their fans will tune out. Others, it could be about job security, right? Like this isn't a great time for the Leafs front office or any others that the team started off with big expectations and, it's starting to become abundantly clear that they're not going to get anywhere close to meeting those expectations. So, it's not an easy time, nor I can tell you, having watched back the full 27 minutes of Don Sweeney over the weekend for a story I'm working on. I didn't do that just for fun.
I figured.
But, it was clearly a painful time for him. He said as much. He's like, we're jealous of the teams that we traded our guys to. Like, we're used to being the teams loading up right now. But he's like, we have to be honest about where we're at. I mean, I think, and I bet Don's feeling, absent the officiating in the outdoor game, I bet Don's feeling pretty good this morning about where his team's at. And that if he looks back at the decisions he made, they've all aged pretty well so far. And they got nice returns on their players, and they identified prospects who are now NHL players in their roster, scoring 30 plus points already. I think Minton and Kuznetsov both have topped that mark. So they're contributing members of the team, and they got a lot more to come. They got Hagens in the pipeline. I mean, look, the Bruins, after one season of missing the playoffs, to me, they're set up to go on a nice little run as one of the league's better teams, and we'll see how far they can climb. I mean, some of how far they can climb will be based on what they find around their core guys. But it was worth it if you're Don Sweeney. And if you want to be optimistic, I really don't see any reason the Leafs can't get there. They don't have everything in place the same way the Bruins did, but I do think they have some solutions in net signed. Joseph Woll and Anthony Stolarz have both played a lot of good hockey for the Leafs. It hasn't been in concert this year. Like, they haven't been able to get one or the other. There's been injuries and absences and all this, but they have that piece. I think, goaltending is always a little unpredictable, but they certainly have the structure of something that could be successful there. They have some key pieces in place at the forward position. I think they got to attack rebuilding the blue line. They have to hope that Chris Tanev is healthy next year after basically a lost season this year with multiple injuries, and, take another kick at it next year. Maybe we'll be looking back on this deadline as a turning point for Brad Treliving and his front office.
Any other thoughts about the Leafs before I ask just a general question about maybe some other teams kind of lost in that mushy middle? I think of a team like an Ottawa, New Jersey and Philly, maybe a little below them. Maybe it's a little bit more clear that they should be selling to. Washington, you bring up as an example. Columbus is right on the outside of the playoff picture.
Well, Columbus, what are they, 8-1, I think, since Rick Bowness was hired?
Yeah, like it's been insane what's been going on in Columbus.
Well, what's interesting is one thing that their front office was thinking when they made the change when they did, it was, we basically have to see between now and the Olympic break / the roster freeze, like, do we have a chance to make the playoffs, or we are pivoting to selling? And I think they're getting an answer. Like, it's going to be harder to sell. Now, they have some UFAs there, including Charlie Coyle, ex of the Bruins, who I know is getting a lot of interest. Boone Jenner, their captain, there haven't been substantive talks about an extension for him. My belief is he'd really like to stay there, but, has to see if those conversations, which are expected to happen over the Olympic break, result in a deal, or maybe you're talking about trading him. That they acquired Mason Marshman, who's a UFA. So the Blue Jackets have some wares to sell if they get there, but I'm guessing this run is probably swaying them more towards holding back anyway to see where they're at. One other point on the Leafs, and this is actually a real conundrum. Mm-hmm. I've been seeing some people say, well, now they have to tank to get into the bottom five, because if the 2026 pick that's promised to Boston is a top 5 selection, which, to be fair, there's a lottery, like they could finish 10th last and win the lottery, and still pick first. But it's kind of complicated, because yes, that would be good, because that would mean, it would be good in a bad situation, because this is a deep draft. I know there's a lot of different prospects people like in this draft, and the Leafs would be getting a top 5 talent in that draft. And those picks tend to be pretty valuable. So that would be a positive. But the negative of that, Julian, would be that their 2027 and 2028 picks would effectively both be unprotected. They would go to Boston or Philly because of Scott Laughton deal. What the Leafs could actually control, weirdly, is if the 2027 pick falls in the top 10, they basically choose which of those teams picks it. So there's like an element of they can at least control the board to some degree. But 2027 and 2028 could be first overall, and it's going to either Philly or Boston. So that's a dangerous spot, because the farther we go along here, it's more of an unknown, right? Like the Leafs, here's the thing. Like I presented you the optimistic version where they make some interesting trades at this deadline. They bounce right back. They do what the Bruins are doing. That would be great. The alternate timeline is they make some poor decisions or ones that don't work out. they start going in the wrong direction. And then they are literally in a rebuild by 2027 or maybe 2028, and they don't own their pick that year. And, that's what happened to San Jose, right? Like the Tim Stützle pick that Ottawa got, it came back in the Erik Karlsson deal, but that was because San Jose had been competitive for years. They were used to going for it all the time. They traded Ottawa a pick. I can't remember which draft that was off the top of my head, but it was an unprotected pick that became the 3rd overall pick that Ottawa got and drafted Tim Stützle with it. Now,
and on top of that, Ottawa was already bad. So they had 2 top 5 picks that year. So that got them Stützle and Jake Sanderson.
Right. And so, but, in this case, San Jose was in its late stages of contention and basically traded a little too far into the future and they got burned by it. There's a world where that's where the Leafs are at if they can't bounce back and be competitive in 2027 or 2028. So there's 2 ways of looking at, do you actually want them to pick 5th overall or higher this year? Because let's say they end up with the 12th pick, just to pick one. That goes to Boston in 2026. It's pretty clean, right? Boston just gets your 12th pick. No one in Toronto will be happy about that, but that it will be off the books, and you just hope it's not too good and that player's not dominating you for the next 15 years. And then your 2027 pick is top 10 protected, and you can move it to 2028 if it ends up being in the top 10. So you're sort of less exposed in that scenario, but then your 2028 would be unprotected. Anyway, I suspect we're going to be looking back on those deals the Leafs made at the 25 deadline for a long time. It's easy to say when it doesn't work out. Had that team, there's a lot of ifs, but if they beat out Florida and they go on a run last year and they go to the Cup final, it's probably not being raised to the same degree. Those were all in kind of moves, but I think in hindsight, they gave up a lot, didn't protect themselves enough. And now, they might have been starting their descent as an organization at a time when they don't own those picks is going to be very, very costly.
To lighten up the mood after you brought up that doomsday scenario, what's it like trying to study all those trade conditions on some of the Brad Tree Living trades of the past?
It was a bit of a mind bender at first, but I've seen worse for sure. The biggest one I remember is the Sean Monahan trade conditions when he was traded. I think it was from Calgary to Montreal, right?
Yes. Yes.
That one, I'm not even going to open the file. Like, I don't even want to try to have to figure that out again. But I remember that is by far the most complicated conditions that I've seen in my time watching this stuff. But I'm kind of nerdy. Like, I do like thinking this stuff through because it does impact how decisions are made today, really. Like that, at the end of the day, obviously the Leafs front office probably doesn't need to read through those as I did on the weekend. They're probably intimately familiar with what they've traded and what it could mean. And I'm sure that's what's made selling at this deadline. I'm going back a few weeks time, like a little less of a reality. It's just only the way they've played that's forced them here where they're now having to really seriously start going down that road.
Okay. I want to get to the New York Rangers and Artemi Panarin. Is there anything on that file?
Not really. It's an interesting one because there is definitely some sentiment out there that it's possible that none of the teams that are kind of in the mix here are willing to give him the sort of contract extension he's looking for. And if that's the case, I mean, it really puts the Rangers in a spot. I mean, it puts them in a spot potentially where he's not being traded, right? I mean, he has a no movement clause. He has full control over this circumstance and situation. And if he doesn't want to be moved as a rental without a contract extension, then he won't be moved. But let's see where that goes. But, the Rangers have now gone 3 games, including their game on Saturday in Pittsburgh, without having Panarin in the lineup for the roster management purposes. Trade-related reasons was what they used to call it. But
that's what the term was used, yes.
But now I think the Rangers labeled it roster management purposes when we talk about labels. But, they definitely want to get this deal done by Wednesday. That was the hope in giving themselves essentially a week to do it. But I'm not hearing about much steam happening here. Like there's still time. There's still full 48 plus hours between now and Wednesday's deadline. So maybe, that deadline will force some action, but right now it's gone a little quiet around Panarin, I have to say. So, part of it, I think really could be just not finding the right fit for his next contract for where he wants to land. And then therefore not giving the Rangers anyone to consummate a trade with.
Super Bowl 60 deserves a sportsbook built for the moment. DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of Super Bowl 60, puts you right in the center of the biggest game of the year. And when anything could happen during the Super Bowl, DraftKings has your back with early exit. If a player goes down in the first half, you still get paid out in cash immediately once your bet settles. No bonus bets, no waiting. By the way, if you're curious, the Seattle Seahawks are the favorites according to DraftKings. The money line set at -230, New England Patriots at +190 for Super Bowl Sunday. New to DraftKings, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if your bet wins. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code SDPN. That's code SDPN to turn $5 into $300 in bonus bets if your bet wins. In partnership with DraftKings, the crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. New York, call 8778-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY. Connecticut, call 8887-897777 or visit ccpg.org. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino in Kansas, wager tax pass-through may apply in Illinois, 21 plus in most states, void in Ontario. Restrictions apply. Bet must win to receive bonus bets, which expire in 7 days. Minimum odds required. For additional terms and responsible gaming resources, see dkng.co/audio. Limited time offer. Maybe this isn't the greatest segue, but thinking of the Rangers makes me think of their game against the Penguins over the weekend, where they celebrated the 10th anniversary of the 2016 Stanley Cup the Pens won, and seeing Sidney Crosby be very emotional. Thought that'd be a good way to at least kind of mention that, because that was a pretty cool moment to see him be very emotional.
Yeah, tears running down his face, and he said, basically, he's like, it's not like I go home and watch YouTube highlights. So like I hadn't seen some of those clips in a while, and obviously hit the man in the feels. I was a little surprised that Phil Kessel was one of the members of that team that wasn't on the ice and wasn't part of those celebrations. I know Phil.
What was he up to?
I have no idea. I mean, at one point he was playing a lot of poker, I know, but and might still be doing it. But, I would have liked to have seen Phil there, but it was cool to see that team back together. I actually covered that entire cup run with Pittsburgh. That 2016 team was a year that no Canadian teams made the playoffs.
Yes.
And so I covered them for all 4 rounds. I was working at Sportsnet at the time. So I spent a lot of time around that group. Was a fun team. You could see, like I saw Jeff Zatkoff, who was the goalie. Remember, he started a game for them as their third goalie and won a game in the playoffs. But he was in the dressing room after the game, goofing around with the guys and talking about how he had 1 career assist, and it was on a Sidney Crosby goal with Evgeny Malkin and him as the assist, which I actually looked up, and it's a true story. It was against Tampa Bay. I had a really nerdy weekend. I was doing deep dives all over the place on hockey lore.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah, it was a cool ceremony, and to do it obviously with Mike Sullivan on the other bench with the Rangers was a nice touch. I saw Jim Rutherford was in town, his first time back, I guess, for a game since he left as the GM of the Penguins. So yeah, they did a nice job with that, and it's hard to believe it's already been 10 years, man. You blink and your life goes by.
Yeah, you're telling me. Oh, sorry. I was about to say, you're telling me. You're older than me. Like you're going through life. Anyway, we've mentioned Boston and Tampa Bay at different points. Yes, I have a question about the Stadium Series, but I still want to get to more of the player movement topics on this show. Anything else you want to mention about some Eastern Conference teams before I go to the West and mention the Edmonton Oilers?
No, I mean, we'll keep an eye on the Rangers, obviously. I might have undersold that segment. I mean, look, there's still very much a scenario where we're talking about Artemi Panarin being traded by Wednesday, which would obviously be a significant NHL deal. It's hard to get a read on even who to identify as the front runners. We've talked about, various teams that have been in there, the Sharks, the Capitals, the Hurricanes. But I just don't get haven't anyway caught any glimpse or reason to believe that anything is, progressing and getting to a point where we're talking about a deal, at least as of Monday morning.
Okay, so what about the Edmonton Oilers? In the last couple of days, Calvin Pickard being placed on waivers. Obviously, the number 3 guy behind Connor Ingram and Tristan Jarry right now. What do you make of that situation in the Oilers in general?
Well, what the Oilers need is they need to create cap room before they're bringing anyone else in, or they need to create cap room as part of the trade to bring someone else in. And there is a feeling that they may be getting a little closer to being able to do that. Obviously Andrew Mangiapane's name has been out there for some time now, and some sense that there's potentially some live wires in terms of moving him before the deadline. He makes $3.6 million against the cap. So if they end up moving all of his salary, that would clearly be something that would give them a bit more room to maneuver. Even with Calvin Pickard, I mean, he was the third goaltender, since the Tristan Jarry came back from injury, with Connor Ingram also up there, and was just ultimately the odd man out. We'll see, probably we'll know by the time you're listening to this, but we'll see if he clears waivers or not on Monday. Would suspect a goalie with his experience level only making $1 million on an expiring deal would be, someone out there seems to always need a goalie, would be a likely waiver claim candidate. But yeah, I think Edmonton is still trying to clear out some of the cap space they need in order to be active. I know they've been the team linked to Bobby McMahon with the Leafs. Makes a lot of sense, frankly. They're going to be looking, as always, for more options on the wing. McMahon has a very reasonable salary at $1.35 million. He hails from Wainwright, Alberta, which is a positive thing, kind of a local guy in Edmonton, but, and skates well on his way to his second straight 20-goal season. Think he fits a lot, for all those reasons, fits a lot of what they'd like to do. So, with the Leafs in Edmonton on Tuesday, be curious to see if those teams link up on something before the deadline. I mean, if not, they've still got a few weeks at the end of February and start of March to maybe strike a deal.
What about any of the potential sellers in the Western Conference? I know there were a couple teams like the Flames and the Canucks, for example, but anyone else above worth looking out for?
I'm always curious about St. Louis, just because they have so many players. They have very attractive players. Now they're also a mash unit right now. I mean, a lot of the guys whose names are out there, are injured. You've got Thomas has been shut down through the Olympic break. He's a potential name that if he were to move would be a big deal. Jordan Kyrou's name has been out there. Justin Falk. I mean, even Jordan Bennington, all these guys, Braden Shen, they have a lot of potential veteran players to move on from, but they haven't started their selling yet. Might be till after. And look, there's a reason that teams make deals in late February, early March too. Like from a cap perspective, teams bringing on salary later is better for their accrual of cap space. So, it's not just that everyone is like CJ in grade school and leaves everything to the last minute. It's not a matter of GMs not wanting to do trades today, but there are cap reasons why they tend to happen right near the deadline. So I think that's part of it. When it comes to some of the other sellers, I think the Flames obviously are listening on their players, but they've made their big deal. They made the Rasmus Andersson trade a couple weeks to go to Vegas. And so I think that they can be a little more patient as we get closer to this deadline. So I wouldn't expect anything from them before Wednesday. The Canucks wide open for business.
That's been clear.
But, been looking especially for an Evander Kane trade to materialize, and it felt like there was some momentum there, and it's since kind of died off a little bit. But always a potential for them to make a move here before Wednesday. But look, I don't think we're talking about 10 trades happening between now and Wednesday. We might get 2. That's where I'd set the over under at 2.5. It's an unofficial line from the CJ show, but I think that's probably the right. Like if we get to 3, that's a lot between now and Wednesday. But if it's 2 or under, then that's kind of where I expect it to be.
I would not be mad if we got the over on 2.5, but maybe that's.
Hey, we've had it's been a steady drip of activity, my friend. It's been a pretty good trade year.
It has. In all fairness, maybe we shouldn't get too greedy when it comes to wanting more activity from these teams. Before I get to Stadium Series, are we good on have we emptied the tank on potential trade freeze talk?
I haven't even had a second coffee yet, so that's the best I got for you on a Monday morning.
You're doing great, CJ. I do want to ask you about that epic Boston-Tampa Bay game over the weekend. Tampa coming all the way back after being down by how many goals against Boston?
5-1.
Entertainment. Some people called it the greatest outdoor game they've ever seen, particularly in that second period where Tampa began their comeback. Would love to know your thoughts on the Stadium Series game that was on Sunday.
My personal vote for greatest outdoor game is an oldie, but 105,000 fans in Ann Arbor for the 2014 Winter Classic, Detroit and Toronto. I'm not just saying it because the Leafs were there. That, like, anyone who remembers that event, like, that was crazy. And I believe it still is the world attendance record for a hockey game. And it was a cool game. It was a snow globe. Also went to a shootout like this Tampa game. But look, I can't argue against anyone who wants to call this the greatest of them all, because you have 10 goals in the game plus sort of an asterisk 11th with the shootout winner.
Yeah, that was ridiculous.
You've got a goalie fight. You've got the comeback from the team on its home ice. And look, a market like Tampa deserved the kind of night it got and the kind of weekend it got from this spotlight from the league. And at the end of the day, that's what, to me, the outdoor games are about. They're a chance for a franchise to have a special moment for their fans. It stands out from any other Boston Tampa game, right? And you get to do the costume walk in, which I love the nod to the creamsicle Bucks jerseys. I love
the creamsicle jerseys.
I thought that looked so cool.
The John Cooper Scarface get up behind the bench was awesome too.
Channeling his Ybor City, him and his coaching staff, resplendent with a lit cigar they all had walking back in after winning the game. I think it's a lot of fun in the market. And so, while it's a little tired as a national product, I'd say, 45 is a lot of them. You don't tune in to go like, what's this going to look like anymore? Because you've already seen what it looks like, but it's still pretty cool. Now, it wouldn't be an NHL game also that there was some controversy. Yes. So this might help, depending on your view of things. If you're a Bruins fan, you're probably not too happy about it, but this might help cement it as also part of the lore of a real best ever outdoor game. In addition to the goalie fight, in addition to all the goals, is you had 7 straight power plays to the Tampa Bay Lightning in the game.
Insane.
I saw someone tweet out, I'm sorry, I can't remember who it was, I would give credit, that Boston, the last time that they had 7 power plays called or penalties called against them consecutively in a game was 2006. So it's a once every 20 years kind of occurrence. Obviously helped Tampa get back in the game. And then on top of that, you have the 2-on-1 goal by Pastrnak appears to win it in overtime, only to somehow be whistled for a penalty.
Absolutely ridiculous. Even
though the referee's arm is up, Jeremy Swayman's going to the bench. The Bruins are carrying the puck up the ice. Like, you thought it was a penalty on Tampa. And the Bruins were pretty pissed about that. I don't blame them. If that happened at a playoff game, if that happened, we'd be talking about it for a week. And to happen on that stage is not, look, everyone makes mistakes, but it's a pretty big mistake. So I don't know where I land on it. I still, 105,000 people at a game is pretty cool. But as I say, I'm happy I spent a lot of time in Tampa over the years. The Lightning have been a first-class organization, literally every word, every way you measure that, from their owner right down, probably certainly among the best GMs and front offices in the league. John Cooper's been the coach there forever, which doesn't happen in our sport. So many classy individuals have come through that team and remain on that team. So they deserve a weekend like that in their market, and their fans showed out, and they got them a win with a little tailwind from all of those power play opportunities.
Surprised when you mentioned the best outdoor game, you didn't mention Crosby winning in the shootout in 08 against Buffalo. That felt like for the Winter Classic, that might still be the peak of that event. I know Stadium Series and Winter Classic is different, but if you're lumping all the outdoor games together, you might still not get a better game than that game.
That was the first. That's actually the first Winter Classic by branding. There'd been the 2003 outdoor game in Edmonton.
There's the Heritage Classic, yes.
That was branded the Heritage Classic. So that actually, I think that Pittsburgh Buffalo game, helped make it an annual thing, right? It was always on New Year's for years, or around New Year's. They played on the 2nd sometimes as well, January 2nd. But that you're right. That's like the OG game that really captured the excitement. Crosby was a young player at the time. Our friend Colby Armstrong scored 21 seconds into that game. He actually had his record broken by Brandon Hagel on Sunday night. Brandon Hagel scored 11 seconds into the game in Tampa. So poor Colby, he was dining on that thing for the last 18 years. And now
that was his one claim to fame, and it's gone.
I see that though. He still said, Hagel, you're, I can't remember the exact wording he used, but you've got the Stadium Series. I'm still the king of the Winter Classic. So he's still trying to hold on to it with his asterisk, and good for Colby. But
look, Colby can only Colby needs this. I'll let him have that one. Let him have it.
And I'll say this, part of those initial outdoor games, like the first ones ever played that was cool, it was like the first time you ever saw them go to Fenway Park or go to Wrigley Field or go to some iconic kind of sporting venues. And so I think that was part of the excitement, like just like what's an ice rink going to look like in Fenway Park? And it was actually Marco Sturm who scored the overtime winner in 2008, I want to say, at Fenway Park for the Bruins. So who's now coaching them. That's the tie-in. But, I think that over time, naturally, it's just a little more saturated, but again, still a great party in the market. I'm trying not to hate on them too much or anything like that.
Hat tip to Sean McDonough of ESPN, who I believe said that Marco Sturm was the first to play and coach in a outdoor game. So yes, I did know that with Marco Sturm. Also, is it weird that before this year, the last time we had seen a goalie fight was in 2020, and we've now seen 2 in the last 2 weeks?
I don't know. Maybe it's going to become a trend. Like, I do think there's some, like, the goalies see the goalie fight. It's maybe more in your mind. It sounds weird, but like maybe we'll see more out there. I mean, there's a lot of respect. Vasilevsky thanks Swayman for taking the fight.
Yeah.
Swayman mentioned that like Game was recognizing Game out there. Like they both guys seem pretty happy to have had that fight. So I don't know. Maybe we're going to see more here, Julian. I don't know.
Any update, by the way, on Anthony Cirelli, who left partway through the game with a shoulder injury?
Unfortunately not, but it didn't look good. And the fact that Cirelli is the kind of player he is, pretty gritty type of player, and that he had to leave the game is, I would say, concerning. And this is a hold your breath couple nights around the NHL schedule, because now we're into the territory where players that suffer even a relatively minor injury are at danger of missing the Olympics. Because, the players start flying over to Milan this week, NHL players, for that Olympic tournament. So, we'll have to wait to see where things land with Cirelli. Braden Point, his Lightning teammate and supposed to be Team Canada teammate, skated again on the weekend. So I think, there seems to be a fair bit of optimism that he's going to be able to go to Milan and play for Team Canada. But, Cirelli is definitely a question mark until we hear otherwise. And any player that plays games Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday this week, that's due to play for one of the countries over at the Olympics, unfortunately, you almost want to bubble wrap them, because the truth is someone can have a relatively minor injury, just week to week injury, takes you out of the Olympics. And obviously with most of this tournament going for the first time and potentially the last time for a lot of them, that would be a disappointing thing to have happen.
All right. Anything else percolating in your mind from the weekend? Linus Ullmark returned to action on Saturday. That's one thing that sticks out in my mind. It was a good moment for him, and a lot of the fans were pretty celebratory.
What was the vibe in the arena? You had boots on the ground.
Yeah, it was
at the former Corel Center in Canada.
You know what's funny? I was talking about the Corel Center with a buddy at the arena over the weekend. That's like I know people think like the Palladium, but like for me, my brain starts with the Corel Center. I don't know if you ever played like Corel Center, like Corel computer games. Like I had computer games growing up. That's what makes me associate the Corel Center as a nerdy 7 or 8 year old as a kid.
I think it was the Corel Center when the Sens first got good, essentially. When like the first wave of Sens teams that was like making the playoffs, and as they were on their ascent, I think it was mostly known as the Corel Center in those days.
Exactly. Anyway, the vibe was pretty good. That was as loud as I've heard for a regular season game from Sens fans, maybe since I've joined the beat. Yeah. And even like referees were going up to Linus Ullmark during the game. One of them was a former teammate of his from his American Hockey League days. They played this video tribute at one point. I think the players were all in the dressing room at this point before the game. They played this video tribute where they played some of his comments, Linus's comments from the TSN interview, where he mentions why athletes won't speak on mental health, and then kind of ties into how like, hey, this, I'm not talking about the Sens fans with this, like they were awesome. And then the fans start giving their tributes, just saying, hey, welcome back. Chris Phillips sent a message too. It was a good vibe. And then of course he ends up being the first star. He ends up being the best player on the ice that night. Like it was like a kind of like if you're a script writer and you're trying to write the story, it's a little like not too perfect, but it was a pretty good story, I think. Yeah, well, I'm happy for him because honestly, when he's going into that game, part of your mind goes to like, what happens if this doesn't go well? Because the thing is like a defenseman or a forward, they can have an off night, but they don't necessarily stand out. But a goaltender tends to stand out if they don't have their best. And that's the nature of the position. It's like
you're never anonymous in the game when you're the goalie, right? And so I just was wondering, like, with that time off, with everything he's been through, like, you just don't know how it's going to go. So I'm glad that it ended the way it did versus, if we're talking about him getting pulled or something like that. So, I think it's a big step for him too to play in a game, because now he's back to just being a regular player. I think a lot of the other stuff, if he wants to continue to talk about it, I mean, that's totally up to him. But if he doesn't and he just wants to move forward, I think he'll move forward, and this will have been a difficult chapter in his life and his career, but I think it can mostly be behind him.
Yeah, that's well said. All right, let's get to Ask CJ. We do this segment every first week episode that we do, where we take in your questions off of social media. Let's start with this one from David, because we haven't talked enough about Artemi Panarin on this show. Chris, will we get an Artemi Panarin trade before the Olympic break?
I'm not doing a prediction because there's no upside, and I don't know is the truth. And I've mentioned it. I think that would be in the best interest of the Rangers, probably in the best interest of Panarin too, just to kind of have it removed, because the question then becomes, does he re-enter the lineup? Are they going to abandon it altogether? You make the kind of move the Rangers made with the idea that you're going to get a deal done. So, we'll just have to see. I mean, he's 34 years old, right? And so there's some risk that comes with paying him among the top, to give him a guaranteed salary among, as an elite forward still it's not to say he can't do it. It's just, I think that gives some teams pause. So we'll just have to see if something comes together there. Brian
was eavesdropping in your brain somewhere about the fact that you were looking into all those conditions and in the Leafs trade, because his question is, with all the conditions on the Leafs trades for the 2026 and 2027 first rounders, could the Leafs even trade their 2028 first round pick if they wanted to? In parentheses, they add, they shouldn't anyway.
They could, there's nothing that would prevent it. They would just have to make sure the conditions fit all the other conditions. So it would be their 2028 pick, conditional on the fact it doesn't go to Philadelphia or Boston from a prior deal, in which case it becomes a 2029 pick. So there's nothing preventing them from trading a future pick, but we don't see NHL teams do this too much. And I think obviously where the Leafs are at too, wouldn't be wise, given that I'm saying there's already some concerns about where they might be in 27 or 28. You don't want to necessarily bring into the possibility 29 pick being spoken for when you might be in, who knows what the team looks like at that point. So they are allowed to trade those picks in that pick, but I would be shocked if they took that stance and did it.
Adam Kerr wants to know if the rumors surrounding Detroit and Winnipeg having a deal together true, and who might the Red Wings be looking at? Logan Stanley, Dylan DeMello, etc.
My understanding, the Red Wings' priorities at this deadline are right shot D. So, some of the rumors that are out there, it doesn't line up for me. I think that their priority is to get someone who can play that other side of the ice. So we'll just have to see. But certainly I expect Detroit to be a seller, or a buyer rather, and to find something that makes sense to fill that spot in their lineup. And when all is said and done, I think it's very likely Winnipeg ends up a seller, and someone like Logan Stanley could be on the move. I don't know if the trade fit is quite there with the Red Wings.
Zahid wants to know, what grade would you give the Toronto Blue Jays on their offseason?
A-. I'm a tough marker. Obviously started off very strong with some of the pitching moves they made, but I'm concerned that they have not replaced Bo's bat in the lineup a little bit. So I'm certainly not down on the front office. I'm not here to hate on them. I've said my piece on them in the past. I think it's A- is a pretty good rating, pretty good grade to bring home. Would have been an A+ if they had got Tucker or even Bo coming back. But, to me, it's still a little incomplete. And, what are we? Probably still 2 weeks from pitchers and catchers. I don't even know the date that they report. It's usually mid-February, though. So there's still time maybe for them to change my mind. But look, it was a fantastic 2025 season. I think it was a reasonably strong offseason, and I've got no reason to believe that it's not going to be a memorable 2026 for the Jays.
I hope so for your sake.
Well, now I'm loaded for bear. I've got all these tickets. Now I'm in on them. I'm right back on.
You're back in.
So I got tickets to opening day, actually.
Oh, so. Jealous. I've never been to an opening day.
I don't think I have either for baseball.
That's
Maybe
awesome.
I don't think I have. I mean, I've been to lots of baseball games. I'm lucky, and I've been a Jays fan for so long. I've been to lots of Blue Jays games, but would be my first. Like, I assume they're going to celebrate winning the AL East or the AL, I guess. Like, I don't know.
The AL, yeah, the pennant, right? Like,
let's say AL. I don't know what the pennant's going to look like because they've never lost the World Series until now. So I don't know how they'll phrase that, but I'm sure they're going to unveil. Yeah, they'll celebrate last year's team at the start, I would think. That'll be a cool day.
Last one for you from Dallas Stars fan. How do y'all shovel snow? Keep this white nonsense up north. Damn near threw my back out, breaking up the ice with a garden shovel.
Here's the thing. I saw, everywhere from Texas to Tennessee, like a lot of places that don't get snow. In Carolina, I think there was some snow in the Raleigh area. A lot of places that don't get snow have gotten snow in the last week. And I'm sorry if you're not used to it because it would be daunting, but it's a little bit more normal for Julian and I. I've spent a lot of time in the last few weeks shoveling snow. We've got a lot of it compared to what a normal winter is in Ontario, I would say, in Toronto where I live. You do it carefully. You want to be careful. A lot of people can have issues shoveling snow. So, take your time, take a breath if you need. But yeah, I just shoveled my car out after that huge snowstorm last weekend. Actually, it was last Sunday. And then last Monday, I spent about 90 minutes on the street shoveling the car out. So I feel your pain.
Hopefully you didn't hurt your back.
I didn't, but I definitely felt it. Like I felt like I did a workout. You know what I mean? But I viewed it as a workout. It's positive.
Also, keep this white nonsense up north is one of the funniest sentences I've ever read in my life. Thank you for all the questions. Thank you to everyone who has subscribed and listens to the Chris Johnston Show. We'll be back later this week with a brand new episode. I'll be in Toronto on Wednesday for the second stop of the Black Aces book tour at a different book list. RSVP. The link is out there on social media, or just go to the A Different Book List website. And I'll see you all on Wednesday.
Peace.
The Chris Johnston Show. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris and follow Julian @JKA McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.